They spoke about me like I wasn't there, sitting in chairs around my own dining room table discussing my life, my future, my choices, as if I had already disappeared, as if my voice didn't matter anymore. And I sat at the end of that table, hands folded in my lap, listening to them decide what should happen to me. And what they didn't know, what none of them expected, was that I had written a letter, and I was about to read it out loud, and everything they thought they knew about me was going to change. I'm 46 years old, living in a small house in Portland, Oregon, and I have shoulder-length brown hair that's slightly wavy, usually tied back loosely because I don't have the energy to do anything elaborate with it anymore. Light skin that shows every year I've lived, soft but tired eyes that people rarely look into because they're too busy talking at me instead of to me, subtle wrinkles around my mouth and forehead that tell the story of smiling when I didn't want to, staying quiet when I wanted to scream, and I wear simple clothes, a cardigan over a neutral blouse, dark slacks, nothing that draws attention, nothing that says, "Look at me," because I learned a long time ago that being invisible is easier than being seen. That afternoon, my sister, Julia, had organized what she called a family meeting, which really meant she'd invited herself, my brother David, my ex-husband Tom, and his new wife Karen to sit in my house and discuss what should be done about me, about my finances, about my health, about my life. And nobody had asked me if I wanted this meeting. Nobody had asked me what I thought. They just showed up, walked into my home, sat down at my table, and started talking like I was a problem that needed solving. Julia started by saying, her voice dripping with concern that felt more like condescension, "We're all worried about you. You've been so isolated since the divorce. You barely leave the house, you're not taking care of yourself, and we think it's time to make some changes." And David nodded along, adding, "We've been discussing options. Maybe you could move closer to one of us, or we could look into assisted living facilities, places where you'd have support and wouldn't be alone all the time." And I sat there, staring at the wood grain of my own table, feeling my chest tighten because they were talking about putting me in a facility, treating me like I was incapable of living my own life. And I was only 46 years old. Tom, my ex-husband, who left me 3 years ago for Karen, had the audacity to sit there and say, "I think what's best for everyone is if we sell the house. It's too much for her to maintain anyway, and the money could go toward her care." And Karen, who barely knew me, who had only been in my life for 2 years, nodded enthusiastically and said, "That makes sense. She doesn't need all this space. And honestly, the house is in pretty rough shape. It would be better for her to be somewhere with professional help." And I felt anger rise in my throat, hot and bitter, because they were discussing selling my house, the house I lived in for 20 years, the house where I raised my children, the house that held every memory I had, and they were talking about it like it was just a transaction, just a problem to solve. I tried to speak, opened my mouth to say something, anything, but Julia cut me off before I could get a word out, saying, "We know this is hard to hear, but we're doing this because we love you, because we don't want you to struggle anymore." And David said, "You've been through so much, the divorce, losing your job, we just want to make sure you're taken care of." And Tom said, "We've already looked into a few places, nice facilities with activities and medical staff. You'd probably be happier there." And I sat there, invisible, voiceless, listening to them dismantle my life piece by piece while I was still sitting in it. The meeting went on for over an hour, and they discussed everything: my bank account, my medical history, my social isolation, my supposed inability to care for myself, and they made lists, assigned tasks, decided who would contact real estate agents, who would tour facilities, who would manage my finances. And through it all, nobody asked me what I wanted. Nobody paused to consider that maybe I had thoughts, feelings, plans of my own. They just kept talking, kept deciding, kept treating me like I was already gone. And I felt myself shrinking, felt my voice getting smaller and smaller until I wasn't sure I had one anymore. Then Julia said, as if it was already decided, "I think we should move forward with this quickly. The sooner we get her settled somewhere safe, the better." And David agreed, and Tom said, "I can start the paperwork for the house sale next week." And that's when something inside me snapped. Something that had been bending and bending finally broke, and I stood up, slowly, and everyone stopped talking and looked at me with surprise, like they'd forgotten I was even there. And I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a letter I'd written the night before, when I couldn't sleep, when I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about this meeting, about my life, about everything I'd lost and everything I still had. I unfolded the letter and my hands were shaking, and I said, my voice quiet but steady, "I wrote this last night and I'd like to read it." And Julia started to say, "Maybe we can do that later. We're in the middle of..." And I cut her off, something I'd never done before, and I said, "No, I'm reading it now." And the room went silent, and I looked down at the words I'd written, words I'd poured out in the dark, and I began to read. "To my family," I started. "For the past 3 years, since my divorce, since I lost my job, since my life fell apart, you have treated me like I'm broken, like I'm incapable, like I'm a burden that needs to be managed. And today, sitting here, listening to you discuss my life as if I have no say in it, I realized something. I realized that you don't see me as a person anymore. You see me as a problem, and I'm done letting you treat me that way." I paused, looked up at their faces, saw shock, discomfort, and I continued. "You want to sell my house, the house I bought with my own money, the house where I raised my children, the house that held every memory I had, and you want to put me in a facility because you think I can't take care of myself. But the truth is, I've been taking care of myself this entire time. I've been paying my bills, managing my health, living my life, and the only thing I haven't been doing is asking you for your permission, and apparently that's not acceptable to you." Julia tried to interrupt, said, "That's not fair, we're just trying to help," but I kept reading, my voice getting stronger. "You think I'm isolated because I don't see you often, but the truth is, I don't see you because every time I do, you make me feel small. You make me feel like I'm failing, like I'm not enough, and I'm tired of feeling that way. I'm tired of shrinking myself to make you comfortable. Tom, you left me for someone else, and now you sit in my house and tell me I should sell it. You have no right to make decisions about my life anymore. You gave up that right when you walked out." David, Julia, you're my siblings, and I know you think you're helping, but helping means listening. It means asking what I want. It means treating me like an adult who can make her own decisions, not like a child who needs to be managed. I read, my voice shaking now, but not from weakness, from emotion that had been bottled up for too long. And the truth is, I have been struggling. I have been lonely. I have been scared. But I've also been surviving. I've been learning who I am without a husband, without a job, without all the things I thought defined me. And I've realized that I'm stronger than any of you ever gave me credit for. I don't need you to fix me. I don't need you to save me. What I need is for you to respect me, to see me, to ask me what I want instead of deciding for me. The room was completely silent now, nobody moving, nobody speaking, and I read the last part of my letter. So, here's what's going to happen. I'm keeping my house. I'm staying right here, and I'm going to keep living my life the way I choose. And if you can't respect that, if you can't treat me like a person who deserves dignity and autonomy, then I don't need you in my life. I'd rather be alone and respected than surrounded by people who make me feel invisible. This is my decision. This is my life, and I'm done apologizing for living it on my own terms. And I folded the letter, put it back in my pocket, and looked at each of them, waiting for someone to say something, anything. Julia's eyes were filled with tears, and she said quietly, "I didn't know you felt that way. I thought we were helping." And I said, "You never asked how I felt. You just assumed." And David said, "We were worried about you. We didn't mean to make you feel small." And I said, "But you did, and that's something you need to acknowledge." And Tom stood up, looked uncomfortable, and said, "Maybe we should go." And Karen followed him quickly, both of them leaving without another word. And I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, felt like I could finally breathe. After they left, Julia and David stayed for a few more minutes, and Julia said, "I'm sorry, I really am. I should have listened to you." And David said, "We'll do better. We'll respect your choices." And I said, "That's all I'm asking for. Just see me, hear me, treat me like I matter." And they both nodded, hugged me, and left. And I stood in my quiet house, in my dining room where they'd tried to dismantle my life, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt proud of myself, proud that I'd finally spoken up, proud that I'd stood my ground, proud that I'd reminded them and myself that I was still here, still alive, still capable, still worthy of respect. I'm still living in my house, still managing my own life, still figuring out who I am and what I want. And yes, I'm still lonely sometimes, still scared sometimes, but I'm also free. Free from people who treated me like I was already gone. Free to make my own choices, my own mistakes, my own successes. And that letter, the one I read at that table, changed everything, not just for them, but for me, because it reminded me that my voice matters, that I deserve to be heard, and that being invisible is a choice, and I choose not to be invisible anymore.